I'll be speaking with Toufic Haddad, a Palestinian-American political analyst. He'll be giving a talk Monday, May 10th in the New Haven Library opposite the Green at 6 p.m. He's written a book, Palestine Ltd, Neoliberalism and Nationalism in the Occupied Territories. Good evening.
Good evening, Stan. Nice to be here.
Rather than try to duplicate what you'll be talking about in New Haven on Monday, I thought we'd discuss an article that was recently published in the New York Times by one of their columnists, David French, who calls himself a conservative and who was a soldier in the U.S. Invasion of Iraq. So French's article was entitled, Israel has a terrible choice to make. What did you think of the title and the article overall?
Well, I think it's sort of, I guess, emblematic of where American political circles are at within the constraints of American political discourse right now, trying to wrap their heads around the situation that they've found themselves in, which is basically commenting on the situation that the Israelis have found themselves in 18, 19 months into this genocide. So I don't know. Fundamentally, neither Israel nor America has actually a solution to the situation there. But what we see the Israelis and the Americans doing, well, I mean, this article is trying to perpetuate this idea that basically, there's potentially a sort of a solution that the Israelis can have if the Israelis attempt to replicate what the Americans did in Iraq when they did this sort of, what do they call it? They call it clear, hold, and build, so, as though and that would be the best way to sort of, separate the population from Hamas, and then Israel could sort of manage the aid and then get some sort of Palestinian leadership on its feet that they could be able to manage with. To be honest, it's all perpetuating a whole bunch of bollocks, to be honest. It's an attempt to reinvent what we've already gone through. The real predicament that Israel and the Americans are in is the fact that uh, Israel tried direct occupation of the occupied territories, the Gaza Strip and the West Bank and East Jerusalem. Been doing that since 1967. They were forced after the first Intifada to reorganize their occupation, and they came up with this indirect occupation model, which was the Oslo Plan. And then October 7th also shattered that. For a while, Gaza had its own sort of, in 2005, Israel attempted to also what they call disengage. The article attempts to perpetuate the mythology that Israel ended the occupation of Gaza. But of course, what it also did was it simply reorganized the occupation. And in fact, all those scenarios that I described, direct occupation, indirect occupation, and disengagement, what they call disengagement, were all forms of reorganizing the occupation, attempting to allow the Israelis to sort of somehow have some kind of uh, maintained control over Gaza and the occupied territories and the people in it and the political will for national self-determination. And to be able to hold on to those territories and to suppress that instinct or those demands for national political rights indefinitely. And they've failed. They've failed. All those scenarios have failed. So this article is attempting to sort of put Humpty Dumpty back together again, assuming that they can sort of somehow come up with some new Palestinian leadership. The real problems with the article is not just that it's sort of perpetuating this mythology, but the truth of the matter is it acts as though Israel is engaged in some sort of normal warfare, and it's a question of tactics or strategy,
Right.
where the truth of the matter is Israel is engaged in open genocide. It speaks very clearly and openly about the desire to ethnically cleanse the Palestinians in Gaza, which he starts off the article talking about Israel's desire to get the captives and to destroy Hamas. And the Israelis are not really, the Israeli political and military class from day one. Sure, that was part of the long list of things, but de facto, they saw this as a historical opportunity to sort of go after the largest bastion of like the ghost of 1948, which is the Gaza Strip.
There was a
Basically,
piece leaked just yesterday that said that we're talking about the goals of this new campaign, and getting the hostages back was number six on their priority. So I mean, ridiculous, a joke. Uh, I mean, this guy French says, Israel is not trying to occupy, and that has rendered Israel's vow to destroy Hamas incalculably more difficult, and it made the war far more inhumane and deadly. So that's why it's inhumane, right? Amazing.
mm, yeah. I mean, I think what people need to realize is, well before October 7th, the United Nations had already declared the Gaza Strip an unlivable territory, right? Like, I mean, what Israel has done is sort of mass accelerated the sort of genocidal nature of the regime that was strangulating Israel and obviously adding a very direct military component to it. Um, but no, I mean the destruction. I mean, Israel has been very clear what they wanted from the very beginning. Where they spoke about it. They spoke about this will be the Gaza Nekba. Like they intended to basically demolish Gaza from but through aerial bombardment largely because they don't have to risk that many people when they do that. And then sort of to create this humanitarian crisis and then restrict all access to food and water and sanitation. And that they've been pretty programmatic and systematic about all that. And then see if they can get the Palestinians to sort of cry uncle at some stage or push them across a border. And in so doing, they would, sort of be able to notch up, in their opinion, a sort of a significant victory. And, Israel, since basically from the river to the sea, there's 14 million Palestinians and Israelis, right? And like if they could like lob off 2 million Palestinians, 2.5 million Palestinians in Gaza, that would be a big accomplishment because from their perspective, the Palestinians in Gaza are most problematic because they're refugees. They don't really, Gaza never had a political future to it, basically. It was always sort of a massive refugee camp, ghetto type place, right? The West Bank is actually has a lot of villages, people from those villages, but the Gazans are actually from the places in what's today Israel, and they have a right to return. And in fact, their land is visible in front of them, and they still hold on to that desire and they declare it. And they've obviously organized politically towards that end. But, whatever, the international mechanisms for trying to get them the rights have failed. So that's why we got to this situation today.
So David French reinvigorates or tries to the trope of the terrorists embedding themselves in the civilian population, and that's why civilians are caught in the crossfire. I mean, my God, after what people are seeing, even on corporate TV, people, this idea civilians are being caught in the crossfire is pretty disgusting.
Yeah. I don't think people really, I mean, we're witnessing like a genocide unfolding, right? Like, and I think that's the big, you know, it's a big historical and political question that we have to ask ourselves. Like, how is it that we got to this situation? How is it that the political mechanisms of adjudication that could prevent this uh, have not been able to do anything? And then that really creates the question of what can we do to stop it? Obviously Israel, in its interests, will do whatever it can to, justify its actions. At this stage, it's pretty transparent what they're doing, and they're on the block in terms of like, the prime minister is being investigated for genocide and war crimes and all this business. They can't travel and all this sort of stuff. So but the real question is where does, how is that translated into reality? And I think how is that translated uh, into a political force that's able to stop this genocide. And rather than just us commenting on it and talking about how horrible it is and feeling demoralized and whatnot, but how can we actually, the real question is not, it's not an analytical question anymore. It's a practical question. How can people of conscience stand up to create a political force that can prevent this genocide? And I think folks in the United States have a really particular role that they can play in that, insofar as the United States and the West overall is sort of the major facilitator of this. And the way to do that, in my opinion, is that we need to go, we need to shut down the oxygen of what facilitates this genocidal regime and as much as possible. Find the institutions and find the corporations and find, I mean, uh, Zionist settler groups who are openly colonizing the West Bank today, for instance, are, organized fundraisers in places like New York or Philadelphia or whatever, pretty openly. The corporations that the universities which are engaged in research with Israeli universities, it's a massive sort of military industrial complex that unfortunately is also sort of embedded to some extent with different parts of US uh, political culture and capitalism. That's what makes this so difficult. And it's also taking place at a time when American political institutional culture is going through a crisis of its own, with the Trump administration, with the collapse of the Democrats, with the collapse of liberalism, with the collapse of neoliberal ideology 15 years ago or whatnot, and that not being replaced by anything except sort of a neo-imperial kind of populist agenda. And we're seeing, the Palestinians sort of getting squeezed. I mean, this is going to have many victims to it, but we see when the state enters in and sort of, goes after university students because they think they're sort of a soft target. That's an affront to, right to organize, to the freedom, academic freedom, to right to free speech, all those aspects which have, repercussions for so many other things. So I think there
But
is
we got to
space.
be encouraged that we see Columbia, which took the worst hits of repression on universities, and here it is. Was it yesterday or 2 days ago? Does an occupation of a library. I mean, that's pretty gutsy, courageous. Um, yeah, and there's a lot of targets for us, so to speak. I mean, in Connecticut, we have the workers' pension funds. I'm talking about public workers, teachers. I'm a former teacher. And we have $113 million invested in Israel, including a million in Elbit. And
Wow,
you know,
shocking.
that's there's campaigns, they've been small, but there's various things that people can do and are working on.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's what we need to do. We need to be working on the research aspect to really analyze the extent to which our local is connected to these larger factors and push the institutions and the contradictions of, you know, basically making a case that, we have no interest that our pensions go to supporting apartheid and genocide in Palestine, you know, um, and whether it's sort of, we need to be on the streets, but we also need to have sort of an institutional sort of political approach that engages with the situation as well. So, but right now it's a crushing moment, and people need to realize it that, especially now we're in a window of time where basically the Israelis are saying, okay, by the time Trump comes back from the Middle East, if he doesn't have a deal, we're not going to allow anything to be left standing in Gaza. So, which is a very, very serious thing. Now, I'm not really sure they have the means to do that, but they obviously have the means to do a lot. And I think everyone, needs to ask themselves, what can we do in our situation today to be able to sort of stand up and stop this? Because that blood will be partially on America's hands as well, to be honest. And it's only going to go towards a failed situation in Israel, to be honest, because I actually don't think Israel, uh, there's not, even if Israel's successful, there's not really going to be an Israel left. It's so fragmented. And so I don't know, whatever. It's just going to be a fascist Jewish supremacist state, basically, that's sort of left over. It's pretty transparent, international political pariah like South Africa.
Well,
And
thank you for speaking with me today, and looking forward to seeing you on Monday in New Haven. And I hope a lot of our listeners or viewers can attend at 6 o'clock in the community program room that's downstairs in the New Haven Public Library. Thank you.
thank you, Stanley. Looking forward.